See, sometimes God will bring victory in your life, but he brings it close to reach. He doesn't just drop it in your lap. And the reason he does that is because he wants us to take a step of faith towards him. My name is Charles Billingsley. I'm the teaching pastor at Thomas Road Church in Lynchburg, Virginia, and I also am a worship pastor there, a worship leader, and I lead worship on a couple of Sundays a month or whenever I'm in town. I also travel quite a bit and do concerts and conferences and speak, and so that's who I am and that's what I do. The month of April in my life was quite interesting, as it has been for so many of us around the country and literally around the world. On March 27th, my 26th wedding anniversary, I was sitting at dinner with some friends and developed a fever. And the fever just kind of kept hanging around for a couple of days and progressively got worse. And by that Monday, the 30th of March, I was at 103 degrees temperature, and it wasn't budging. Nothing was happening for it to go away. Finally went to the doctor that day and tested negative for the flu, and so he tested me for COVID-19, and we didn't really think I had it, but then sure enough, 2 days later, the test results come back on April 1st of all times, telling me that I did in fact have this coronavirus. It was just a totally miserable experience. And by the time I rolled around to about April 9th, it was on that Thursday, the Thursday before Easter, I was still at 103.5 degree temperature all day long, every day, and it was miserable. But now I was having a little trouble breathing, and my doctor came over to my house. I have a good friend of mine who's my doctor, and we play golf together and things. And so he came over to my house and he listened to my lungs and he said, "Man, you've got double pneumonia in these lungs and your lungs sound horrible." And he said, I hate to tell you this, but I got to send you to the hospital. And I said, "When?" And he said, "Right now." And so I ended up in the hospital about an hour later, sitting there, and thankfully I never had to go on a ventilator. I never even went on oxygen, but I was there for precautionary reasons, because people who have this virus, if your lungs just shut down on you, you won't have time to get to a hospital. There's just very little time because you can't breathe. You know, one of the hardest parts about the coronavirus is that it doesn't just mess with you physically, but also emotionally and mentally. I guess I should say psychologically. You're dealing with this isolation anyway. I'll never forget that Thursday night. I was feeling so frustrated and just disappointed and really angry about the whole reason I even had this thing. I didn't know how I caught this thing. I didn't know how long I was going to have it, but man, it just kept dragging on. And by that Thursday in the hospital, I just decided, you know what, I'm just going to pray for a miracle. And so I just started to pray that God would heal me right then and there, that he would just deliver for me this spectacular miracle. I could walk out of the hospital room, knock on the door and say, "Hey, nurses, doctors, I'm good to go. You can let me out of here because I'm completely healed." Well, that's not what happened. And as I prayed throughout the night, I mean, it's 2, 3 in the morning now, and I'm just praying, and I'm on my knees next to my hospital bed, and I just was getting so frustrated because I was so believing that he would heal me right then in that moment, but he didn't. And as the hours drove through the night, I mean, I'm telling you, I got more frustrated and angry with the Lord, and suddenly it dawned on me that it was Thursday before Easter, which is the same night 2,000 years ago when Christ was in the house of Caiaphas, and they beat him to within an inch of his life, and they were pulling his beard out and spitting upon him, and then of course the next day all the torture that he endured, and of course the cross itself, and suddenly I felt like my little oxygen issue and my fevers was pretty minuscule compared to what the Lord went through for me. And I got over my anger a little bit. I felt great conviction over that. But the one thing I started to realize is that, in this crazy time, I'm starting to realize that the Lord does have a plan for this. And I'll never forget how I was just sitting there in that bed, and it suddenly dawned on me that everything I was praying for was about me wanting my will to be done. And the difference between what I was going through that Thursday night and what Jesus went through that Thursday night before he endured the cross was my prayers were completely selfish. Jesus' prayer to the Lord in the Garden of Gethsemane was, Lord, let this cup pass from me, but not my will, yours be done. And I wasn't praying that. I was just praying that my will be done. And the Lord broke me over that. Once I got over my anger and my frustration, I just began to silence myself and listen to the Lord, and I learned some really important lessons through all this. And one of the things that I realized really the next day in the hospital, that Friday, which by the way was the same day my new record was coming out. This new project came out that very day on Good Friday. But I was laying there in the hospital bed, and I was just thinking about how fragile life is. And I was reminded all over again that weekend in the hospital that life truly is fragile. And we've all been reminded of that as we've seen how quickly our economy can tank, or our society or our culture. And now in the midst of all this COVID mess, now we actually have the riots and the racial tension going on as well. And so very difficult days, and we've all seen how we can be riding real high and then suddenly everything goes away just like that. And it's just a reminder that life is fragile. But you know what else? I was reminded that day that faith is completely essential. And I had to be reminded about what faith really is. You know, when I was laying there, I was asking the Lord to heal me. And I wanted him to heal me right then and there so I could see the results of his healing. And then as a result of all that, believe in him more deeply. But that's not what faith is. You see, faith is the evidence of things unseen. And so I wanted to see what he would do in my life, and then I would believe in him more deeply. But what God wanted from me was to believe in him more deeply. And then I would see the results of faith in my life. I had faith mixed up that week. I really did. I wanted to see and then believe. But what God wants from us every time is to believe, and then we will see. And he did heal me, but it was in his timing and in his way. And it didn't come till 12 days later. But boy, I sure learned some big lessons about faith as I laid there in that hospital. When I went to the hospitals was when you really feel the isolation, because nobody can visit you, and you know, you're just there by yourself the whole time. The doctors and nurses come in and they do the best job they can, but it's still a very strange thing because they don't want to get this thing from you either, you know, so they're not in the room very long. And it was just a very, very difficult time. You know, it's amazing how somehow, some way, God in his providence timed this thing this way. We have completed this project, this album project, in January. We set the date to release it in January. We were going to release it April 15th. That date was set 4 months before we released it. We wrote all the songs in the fall of last year, and then all of a sudden, here I am, the night of the release, laying in a hospital bed. No way to do any concerts, no way to do any events. Everything's been canceled. My whole world is upside down. Don't have anything on the books all the way until August. and that's not exactly the best way to release a record, by the way. You're supposed to promote it and do concerts and things. But anyway, that's where I was. And so every time I produce a new record or release one, I have a tradition. I like to listen through the record one last time on the night it comes out. And I just happened to be in the hospital. So I put my earbuds in and I listened through the record. And I was just amazed at how poignant and how timely so many of the songs on this record are for this day and time in our nation's history. And so it just blessed me. I mean, I was kind of transported out of realizing that it was me singing and just listening to these lyrics from songs like Sing for My Soul, which is about the intercession of the Holy Spirit when we don't know what to say because we're so frustrated or so down. Songs like Fragile, a remake of Sting's great song that just reminded us of how fragile our culture and society is and in our own lives. And then other songs like Where You're Supposed to Be, which is a wonderful reminder that in the midst of all this mess, could it be that God is using this very moment to place us exactly where He wants us to be. You said you believe God works in all things for your good. You've seen enough to always trust His heart. But now life is hitting harder than you ever thought it could. The light of hope is threatening to go dark. You pray you'll see the seasons change, asking for a brighter day. Could it be God's best for you is in this very place? What if blessings come from rocky roads the faithful have to climb? What if growing faith looks like an old fight you're facing one more time? What if God is working perfectly in ways you're soon to see? Then maybe you're right where you're supposed to be. I don't know what you're going through right now. I don't know if you're going through this same kind of virus or health issues that I went through. Or maybe you've lost your job like 41 million other Americans. Or maybe you're just going through a difficult time with your family. Whatever it might be, I just encourage you to trust the Lord. Seek His face. Lean not on your understanding. And let Him grow your faith. And in the process, He'll help you understand exactly it is why you're going through this. And He'll also point you in the right direction to get through it. You know, He'll never leave you. He'll never forsake you. He's with you every step of the way. So trust Him. Lean on Him. And then get some time of solitude so you can just hear His voice. Here's a passage from Jesus Calling from January 6th that I hope will encourage you today. I am able to do far beyond all that you ask or imagine. Come to me with positive expectations, knowing that there's no limit to what I can accomplish. Ask my Spirit to control your mind so that you can think great thoughts of me. Do not be discouraged by the fact that many of your prayers are not yet answered. Time is a trainer, teaching you to wait upon me, to trust me in the dark. The more extreme your circumstances, the more likely you are to see my power and glory at work in your situation. Instead of letting difficulties draw you into worrying, try to view them as setting the scene for my glorious intervention. Keep your eyes and your mind wide open to all that I am doing in your life. I think I would just add to that, worship begins in the mind. And Paul reminds us in Philippians chapter 4 to not be anxious for anything, to not worry, but instead with all prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, make your requests be known to God. I'll leave you with this. Worry is like fog. Did you know that fog, even 7 city blocks of fog, only equates to about 8 ounces of actual water? And yet fog and its perception, and it'll blanket a city like this and runways and everything else. So fog creates for us a lot of problems, and yet the substance of fog is very, very little. And I think that's the problem with worry. Worry is like fog. It just sort of covers everything in our lives and we become consumed by it. But many times we're worrying about something that has very little substance. Do you know that 80% of the things people worry about never actually take place? And so I would just encourage you to be like the little sparrow in Matthew chapter 10, where Jesus says, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for just a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from the will of the Father. And God knows even the very number of the hairs on your head. So don't worry. You're worth more than many sparrows." And you certainly are. You have ultimate, tremendous, the highest value to God. He loves you more than you love yourself. And He wants you to be who you're supposed to be, even more than you want to be who you're supposed to be. And so I would encourage you to keep your eyes and your mind wide open to all that He is doing in your life, and to trust Him, and then to worship Him in all things and through all things. God bless you.